We are again in session post-lunch. Senator Springer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to lend my voice in support of these amendments before this Honourable Chamber this evening, where Barbados finds itself in a situation where having these laws on its statute books means that having a mandatory death penalty on the books means that Barbados runs counter to a number of treaties and conventions that it is signatory to, including the ruling handed down by the CCJ, Caribbean Court of Justice, which is the highest court in the land, and the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights. And it has been said here by at least two of my colleagues that our reason for being here today is not to abolish the death penalty, but rather to abolish the mandatory death penalty, and in so doing, give judges discretionary power when it comes to handing down sentences in the case of murders. It must be noted, and I think that Senator Franklin would have alluded to the fact that there are some cases, some crimes that warrants the sentence of death, and in cases like that, judges are still allowed to hand down sentences depending on the brutality of the crime, if it was premeditated, if certain persons, if a judge was killed, or magistrate, persons of that nature, if it was a hate crime, things like that, the judge still has the right to hand down or to sentence a person to death. So just want to make it clear that that remains as is on our statute books. And what we're actually doing is abolishing the mandatory death sentence. We know that over the years there have been cases where persons have been provoked, where there are cases where there are other mitigating circumstances, and some persons will want, because they believe that they are innocent, will want to face the court system, want to face the system and fight for their freedom. And in some unfortunate cases, some of these persons are found guilty, and the judge has no option but to sentence that person to death. And we know that in some cases there are mitigating factors that would otherwise determine that that person would probably warrant a lesser sentence. And we are giving the judges that discretion. But my focus this afternoon, Mr. President, stems from my experience that I would have had in the past, recent past, and something that Senator Walker mentioned earlier, where he said that there are currently 62 persons in prison sitting down right now charged with murder, and another 11 persons or so on death row. 62 persons, 62 more likely young persons charged with murder. And I'm concerned about these numbers. I'm also concerned about the seriousness of the crimes that they're charged with, many of the young persons in jail. And one thing, let me start by saying I had the opportunity to work in the prison in 2016. And whilst there, I interviewed with work. I went there to work. Yeah, I did some research there. in 2016. And one of the things I discovered was that a number of the prisoners that I would have interfaced with, I would have interacted with, who were charged with murder and other serious crimes, it was not their first offense. That murder charge, that gun charge was not their first offense. Many of them were in jail before on minor charges, would have done some time, came back out, still teenagers, and then eventually graduated into more serious crimes. Which brings me to something that was alluded to by both Senator Drakes and Senator Haynes. The high rate of what we call recidivism in our prison. I saw numbers being quoted from between 40, I think someone alluded to 58%. I heard up to 68% of our prison population are recidivists. There are persons who have reoffended, who have been released, commit another crime, and found themselves back in prison. Now I ask myself, why? Why are these young people finding themselves back in prison? And I ponder it, and I think that there are a number of factors, but I'm going to address just a few of them this afternoon. I think a lot has to do with how we as a society treat ex-prisoners. How Barbadians treat ex-prisoners. When persons are released, they go to prison and they do their time, they're released back in society. In many cases, they are marginalized, they are alienated, they are shunned, they are stigmatized. Persons do not give them a chance. They don't want them working around their homes. They don't want them working in their business and their corporations. They don't want them around them, period. They're treated like subhumans. And the thing that we need to understand as a people, that when you go into prison and you come out of prison, you have the same ambitions, the same dreams, some of the same responsibilities that you had when you went into prison. The difference is now that to finance those ambitions and dreams and responsibilities as a young man, to support that child that you have, that family that you left behind, becomes even more difficult for that young person when that person comes out of jail. But the ambitions and the dreams are still there. They still want to do something. They still want to be men. And the reality is, when you come home from prison, you don't stay in the house with your parents. You're gonna find yourself back out in the streets with your friends. And if you don't have a job, you don't have any means of supporting yourself, then you're gonna find yourself doing some of the same very things that you did before, that got you in trouble in the first place. And you may also come to realize, after trying to get work or trying to find, some guys actually try to engage in their own businesses, that people don't necessarily care as much about you after as an ex-prisoner, and as you were as they care about you before. As an ex-prisoner, they care less about you, and you find that persons tend to, if they don't care about me, then I'm not going to care about you neither. And I've heard a young man, he was not even an ex-prisoner, but he said that if he doesn't find any work, he's going to go and snatch somebody's purse. He told me that. He said, "Spread, if we don't find work, I can snatch somebody's purse." This was a long time ago. I mean, fortunately for that particular young man, he found work very shortly after. But I know that kind of mentality exists. And it's even more difficult for persons coming out of prison. If they can't find any work, they're not going to think twice about snatching somebody's purse. And that's when the graduation in crime happens, where, as I was explaining to Senator Drake on my way in, you might go there set out to snatch a purse, but the person might fight back. And that's when it evolves into possibly a murder. That's how it happens most of the time. Right, let's face it. So, I mean, there's something wrong. And the fact that we have so many persons coming out here in society and reoffended, it tells us that there's something wrong about the rehabilitation program in prison. I've heard that there's a program, there's a probation services program, there's a rehabilitation program, but something is wrong if you are seeing the types of numbers between 58 to 68% recidivism in the prison. Something is definitely wrong. Either that program is not working, or society is treating these people with such scorn that they will never assimilate or fit back into society again. And I often tell people that when these guys come out of the prison, they're not going to go and break into each other's homes. No, they're not going to break into other ex-prisoners' homes. They're going to break into our homes. So when we shun them, when we don't employ them, we give them, well, I wouldn't say we give them, but we create a situation where they may find themselves breaking into our homes, the gainfully employed person's homes. So by avoiding them, we actually hurting ourselves too. If you understand what I'm saying. It's a fact. We as a society need to be more forgiving. We have to be able to give persons a second chance. And I think if we can give them a second chance while they're still minor offenders, then we could perhaps cut down on the amount or the rate of recidivism. Treat them as people. But it goes further. I've had, as a teacher, I've had the unfortunate experience of going into Dawes Prison and in what they call a quad there. I will call it cell for the time being, but they refer to it as a quad. I saw 5 students, 5 young men that I either interacted with or taught when I was a teacher. 5 in one space. 5, and I think 3 of them were charged with murder. It's the worst thing that you as a teacher would want to experience. When you see 5 young persons, and I taught at one of the North secondary schools, which brings me to the point that I'm going to make now, that I find that a vast majority of these young men are from the North secondary schools. And I'm glad to see that the Ministry of Education has taken some steps to rectify some of these problems. Because many of them were not academically inclined. I interviewed 50 persons, and of those 50 persons, one single man who was in his 50s told me that he had a CXC, or that he had CXCs. One single. Of the other 49, not one single CXC. And they came from the schools that they came from St. George, Parkinson, Frederick Smith, Graydon Seeley, Darrell Jordan. Those schools, Grantley Islands, those are the schools they came from. Which tells me that we need to address the problem there. I didn't meet anybody from Combermere or Harrison College or none of those schools. Not to say there weren't persons from those schools in prison, but I didn't meet any. No, Caswell was not there. I'm glad that the ministry has taken steps to address the imbalance when it comes to academia and technical and vocational training, because some of these guys need another track of learning, of instruction, and that's why I think that one of the major stakeholders in all of this, because as we said, we have to address the problem at the front end. If we can get them some necessary skills and competence, some skills, some training, maybe perhaps they will not have to resort to crime when they leave schools, because in many cases they come to schools, they can't get the CXCs done. They didn't pass anything, so they don't have any skills, employable skills that they can use to make a decent living. So that's why they're basically forced into crime. And I explained the cycle before. So I'm glad that at least education see that the introduction of these CVQs and such like in the schools will assist in that regard. And I would want to see a similar program being introduced in the prison as well. As far as I know, they teach English and maths in prisons. And perhaps they could introduce some of these CVQs in the prison system, so as well when these persons come out, at least they have those skills and certification, not just the skills, because I'm sure they're taught skills in prison, but certification. So along with that, the certification and a different attitude from society towards these persons, I think would go a long way in decreasing some of these cases of recidivism and perhaps cases of murder as well. Because, as I said, it's a gradual step. Most of the persons who are charged with murder have been there 2 or 3 times before. I've also had, and speaking about society and persons, we need to understand. And it was said in prison by a prisoner that I spoke to. It was said by one of the wardens as well, that we need to stop looking at these young men, these prisoners, as monsters. And it may seem strange, or a strong word, monster, but I assure you that people sometimes see them as monsters. And when we were driving, going towards the prison, there were 3 or 4 of us in the vehicle, and we knew that we had to interview prisoners. And the discussion in the vehicle centered around the fact of security. What kind of security will be in place when we get to the prison? Will there be a fence or some glass barrier between the interviewers and the prisoners, so that it would be less likely, so that the interviewers would not be attacked? People actually thought, some of the persons I went with actually thought that the prisoners would attack them. They thought they were these dangerous monsters, like they were monsters. When we got out there, we were shocked to discover that they were so polite, so meek. I could not believe that these people actually committed crimes. But the perception out here is that the prison is filled with rabid monster-like persons. That if you are left in a room with them, that there's a good chance that you'll be attacked. When in actual fact, that's not the case. And I think it's that kind of fear, that kind of perception, is what feeds the fear when they come back into society, that causes persons to shun and reject them. But I want to, as I said, I alluded to tell you what was said to me. Many of those persons made some mistakes. And all of us in here, are not immune to those mistakes. In fact, we are just, and all of us, whether you're a lawyer, pastor, surgeon, trade unionist, it doesn't matter. We are all just one bad decision from going up in that place. And I've had the sobering experience of sitting down across the table from a young man, from 2 young men dressed in what looked like $3,000 suits. And yes, well groomed, well decorated. And in less than 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I saw them in the paper, bangles on their hands, going to Dodge prison. So it tells me that none of us in here are immune. Any one of us can make that bad decision and find ourselves up there. And we will want to know that we have a system that is fair, that gives the judge the necessary discretion to treat us with a certain degree of fairness based on our crime, and not a situation where they are forced to hand down a sentence that is excessive. And that's all I have to say on that particular matter. But as I close, I just want to reiterate that this particular bill this amendment that I support I think is necessary, it's timely. We need to get away from this idea that we have to kill people because they commit a particular crime. Reverend Senator Maxwell, in his conclusion, he made the point that each life has value, even if that life is in prison. And I believe, I'm a strong believer in that each life is valuable. Whether you commit a crime, regardless of the circumstances, does not make your life any less valuable. With those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm following from Senator Springer, and I am extremely impressed with his presentation. Maybe not so much in his determination of the price range of certain apparel, but very impressed with his presentation. Sir, the baton started off this morning with Senator Walcott giving a very good introduction as to the history of the legislation before us. Indeed, I believe, and we lawyers readily think this, that most other professions, including surgeons, have a secret want to practice law. And I think what we saw this morning from Senator Walcott was a demonstration of the eagerness with which he attacked this research, belying a certain need to be filled, which I think he enjoyed this morning. I also have to give kudos to Senator Sands, who I think gave an excellent rendition of the history of Barbados and the issue with regard to the death penalty, the considerations with regard to saving clauses, which any lawyer who tells you they understand saving clauses properly is lying, and the fact of the need for us to have a more guided interpretation. So I really would like to start by expressing my admiration for those pieces. Mr. President, what we have here is good law. Simply put, this is good law. It allows the judiciary discretion in interpreting and applying what they think is the appropriate sentence for murder. It removes the shackles of the automatic death sentence and provides the freedom of the judicial officer, albeit with some legislative guidance, to set forth a sentence so that the punishment fits the crime. I was unsure whether to speak on this, but as a lawyer, there's a certain pressure that you speak on certain topics. But what really prompted me to my feet this afternoon was listening to the presentation of our beloved Senator Franklin. And there was some rhetoric, and it's hard to say that he's topped himself, but there was some rhetoric which was even more effusive than he normally is. And this rhetoric was utilized to attack the conventions which Barbados has signed on to, the CCJ, and then a general wide swath with regard to attacking any laws or persons who implemented them. And I thought it best, for the sake of a balanced and informed discussion, to join issue with Senator Franklin on these three areas before I proceed to the other considerations regarding this legislation. Firstly, Senator Franklin attacks the conventions and the fact that government officials go overseas and enter into agreements which bind the entire nation. Well, Senator Franklin, that's the purpose of government. That's why persons are elected to represent the interests of other persons. And if our beloved senator continues to raise the point, it could be said that it is unsure as to which persons would have elected Senator Franklin to speak for them. So this national interest, or these persons he seeks to represent, should be somewhat stymied by the reality of the governmental institutions which exist. Government is elected by the people. The representatives of the people go to these organizations, and depending on what the representative sees or hears, brings it back for the other representatives to vote on, and they agree in cabinet and further on by way of what we're doing now, what should become law. The idea of having a referendum, one, is not provided for in our Constitution, and two, would make the system of government extremely clunky and burdensome. So while it is attractive for this rhetoric and it makes a nice sound bite, we must recognize the danger of continuously plying this type of remark, which takes away from the government's ability and purpose with regard to looking after the interests of the persons and the established methodology for this to be done. Everyone knows that it's now extremely popular for the concept of putting your country first. It is amazing that what was once viewed as an outlier, although it was popular, and these things are all trends, a few decades ago, has now become in the forefront again. So we're again seeing a nationalistic surge. We see it in America, we see it in Europe, and now we see it in Brazil. So maybe our beloved senator is just at the forefront at this tide. However, I believe we do have a duty as persons who sit here and speak with a certain element of knowledge to seek to guide the discourse in a way that allows the issues to be debated without appealing to a common denominator. Besides the issues of convention, Mr. President, a broadside was then launched at the CCJ. Now, this is not something which Senator Franklin has done on his own. It was certainly an interesting course of discussion during our elections in May, and we saw what happened in the referendums yesterday in Antigua and Grenada. We don't have, again, the referendum ability in our Constitution, so we have to rely on our elected officials to guide us in this process. And when we consider the CCJ and its origination coming from the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, and the steps that were made in CARICOM towards acting as a unified entity, for these discussions to be held in this chamber, and we start to hear the references which were so familiar back around Federation time about one nanny goat and the Trinidadians coming for your goat and one from 10 leaves zero, does not do us a service as a Caribbean people or as Barbadians seeking to move forward as a nation. What is so scary about the mirror image that we see in ourselves that we have to seek recourse for our final judicial decisions at the Privy Council? Why can't we get it right within the Caribbean? Why is it so offensive? Why do we always have to go to others to solve our disputes? We sit down here and we say we want to do things and move forward, but Senator Franklin, according to you, we should take a step backward and go up to England and let them decide these things for us. I say no, sir. I say we have made progress. I said Barbados has always been on the forefront of championing legislation that the other territories have not. And we have done it fearlessly. And we have done it, both political parties have always understood we in Barbados take the forefront of this legislation. So Senator Franklin, I say to you, I understand the appeal. I understand that it's sweet and it sounds good, but let us be careful that we do not, in our zeal, encourage the populace to take a step backwards with us because it suits the interests of rhetoric of an argument. Finally, remember, sir, when you speak to cutting down laws in order to get to these persons that you describe as murderers who's shooting up the place and doing drive-bys. I can't remember the exact term you use. One of the books that struck me at our alma mater, University of Waterford, sir, Mr. King, we were dealing with the man for all seasons. And there's a particular line that I would like to refer you to when young Roper was saying that we should cut down all the laws to get to the devil. Well, Senator Franklin, I urge you not to do so, because I would be very upset if our beloved senator were to find himself in need of those laws and we had cut them down. Now, the substantive reason, I think, has been well laid out by the previous speakers. And the Lord does seek to make wrong things right. And for those who complain about the length of time, in true Bajan style, taking time is not laziness. We may have been speaking about it for a while, but we're here now. And I believe that we all agree we need to give the judges the discretion to deal with these matters. Those of us who have had to interact with persons of death row, we understand the seriousness of it. I myself, I was actually just doing a quick tally. I have been to, in various capacities, interact with prisoners on death row in Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, and the United States. And it is extremely depressing to interact with these persons, understanding the seriousness of where they have found themselves and the despair of where they are. So we understand that is a serious situation that we're dealing with. But we must not only think about the persons who perpetrate the crimes. We must think about the victims and our need to comfort them as a government and to show that we are protecting them and we are deterring others who will seek to cause them harm. We have to think about the nature of the crime conducted. How many of these crimes are being captured? How many of these crimes are affecting our society? What do we need to do to protect our national interests? And then finally, we even have to think about the perpetrator. Because as Senator Springer has laid out, despite how we might view it here, there for the sake of God goes any of us. And these persons who commit these crimes belong to our society. You can't lock them away, or you could lock them away, but at the end of the day, they are members of our society, and we all have 6 degrees of separation from someone up at Dodds. So it's easy to sit in judgment as to what we should do. Lost them way, hang them. You know, Bajans don't hang, they hang. So it is easy to sit in judgment without understanding the cause and the effects of such crimes. And I believe that Senator Springer has done an excellent job of going into that from his background. But when you have the weight of another person's life in your hands, should we not give the judges the ability, as much as possible, to deal with it fairly? And that is what this legislation seeks to do. So let us give the judges the tool to apply the discretion they think necessary in the relevant cases. Senator Haynes said it very well. Let us legislate and let the judiciary judge. Let us keep the separation of powers. So it's always sad and it's always easy to go within oneself and judge. And this is not me trying to make excuses for any crime. It is just that we are not the ones who have to stand in judgment of these persons. So let us not do so. Let us let the judges do it, but give the judges the tools so they can do it properly. Finally, Mr. President, there is one issue which has given me pause, and that is on the proposed amendment to the Constitution. The existing Constitution at Section 78, Mr. President, if I can take you there. at section 78.3, sir, provides that where any person has been sentenced to death for an offense against the law of Barbados, the Governor General shall cause a written report of the case from the trial judge, together with such other information derived from the record of the case or elsewhere as the Governor General may require, to be forwarded to the Privy Council, so that the Privy Council may advise him on the exercise of the powers conferred on him by Section 1 in relation to that person. So currently, as it stands, there is an automatic report generated by Her Excellency in relation to any person who has been sentenced to death. Now, far be it from me to seek to increase the workload, my concern relates to the amendment which is proposed. The reason I have that concern is the amendment which is set forth, if we start, Mr. President, at section 5 of section 78.5 of the proposed change to the Constitution under prerogative of mercy. Under section 5, it says a person has a right to submit directly or through legal or other representative written representation in relation to the exercise by the Governor General or the Privy Council or any of their respective functions under this section. And section 3 says where a person makes a submission in accordance with subsection 5 in a respective offense, the Governor General shall cause a written report of the case from the trial judge. Now, the proposed modification on a whole is very modern and allows for oral applications. The concern I have, though, Mr. President, is that this change to the Constitution now makes it incumbent on the prisoner to make the appeal for clemency, as opposed to the Constitution as currently drafted, in which the report is automatically generated by the Governor General. The concern that I have is that there are persons who, for a variety of reasons, mental capacity, education, may not want to be here, will not be able to utilize the procedure as set forth in the amendment. And I think that there should be a further look just in relation to that clause, sir, in relation to saying that there should be an automatic report generated. Because look at this situation. We have 11 persons on death row. So there are not that many being sentenced. And we know how the wheels of justice grind in our fair land. I think it is extremely reasonable, considering the weight of the potential death sentence, that in this situation, that we allow the report to be generated automatically by the Governor General, to allow the Privy Council to be automatically triggered to consider clemency in the case of an individual. Finally, Mr. President, those three areas are where I believe I can lend support to the legislation. I have sought to bring home certain considerations to this honorable chamber, and I join with Senator Springer, who I think has done very well in dealing with the asides, in trying to maintain that we recognize the seriousness of the matter that we're dealing with, and we go forth and find the best solution for the people of Barbados. I thank you, sir.
Next recognized Senator Greenwich.
Thank you, Mr. President, for recognizing me and giving me the opportunity to speak on this bill. Let me begin, sir, by saying that, like Senator Maxwell, I too used to be a very strong opponent and a very strong critic of the death penalty. But, sir, something happened which made me make a complete roundabout turn. I had come home from teaching to spend the summer holidays. And as I walked into my house, it wasn't mine yet, it was my aunt's house, I could hear this wailing. And she was asking me, how come you get home already? How come you here so quick? What happened? I said, I haven't heard anything. What's happened? She told me, my uncle, only 2 hours before, had been murdered. He was sitting, sir, in a bar in which there was a big argument. He was the quietest person I have ever met, I have ever known. There was this big argument, which one fellow was made to look very shame in front of others. And he decided, I going home for my weapon, and when I come back and I find anybody here, I can kill who I meet. My uncle was in the corner. He was not in the argument. He didn't move. Fella came back. Everybody shouted, he coming back up, he coming back up. People ran out. My uncle didn't run. Because he was that type of person. He never troubled anybody. The fella dropped one stab and killed him on the spot. I have to say that from that day onwards, I am one of the strongest proponents of the death penalty you could ever meet. And I can tell you something else. He was convicted for murder, condemned to hang. That sentence was commuted to life imprisonment, and then he walked out about 5 or 7 years afterwards, a free man. I can tell you, as I said already, from that day until now, I am one of the strongest proponents you could want for the death penalty. And I make no apologies for it. It touched me dearly. It touched my family. Whether it is an eye for an eye or what it is, I am a proponent of the death penalty. I must also say, though, that even though I do support the death penalty, like so many speakers, about 3 I've heard so far have said, there are occasions where people have been convicted for murder in Barbados, and I didn't think that they deserve the death penalty. I recalled a murder in the northern part of this country involving a young man who killed an old lady. A lady who, he said, he claimed, knew everybody's business, including his, and talked about it. And he waited on a day when, as we would say in Bajan, she was in her ground, working, and he killed her. Not knowing, of course, that someone was in their ground too that could see him. Eventually, he dug a shallow grave. He got a friend of his, dragged the lady, put her in the shallow grave, covered her, and so on. And when the trial, the case came up, he was convicted for murder. not only him, but the friend that helped him drag an already dead woman and put her in that grave was convicted for murder. I didn't think that the second fellow deserved it. There are other occasions too. There might be occasion where we've learned of something that happened in St. George, where there were 3 people to do a robbery. 2 went in to do the robbery, 1 carried a gun. 1 shot the man after being told, don't shoot, we got the money. Came out, the one who was on the outside with the getaway car, they jumped in the car, he drove them off. All 3, including the man with the getaway car, were convicted for murder. And this was a time when murder meant death. When murder meant death. So yes, there are times when, even though I'm a proponent of the death penalty, that I felt that we were just being a bit too harsh on certain people. Now, let me say at this stage that if we really think about it, we would realize that in our lives, there are many aspects of everyday life which we have already put into categories. You would have heard Senator Springer just now. He was speaking of the schools. Without our knowing it, we have actually put those schools in categories. We have put hotels in categories. We talk about a 1-star and a 2-star and a 3-star. We have our hurricanes and so on. We've put them into a category 1, or 2, or 3. Even sickness, whether it be from the common cold to cancer, and even within cancer we have stage 1 and stage. If we really think about it, our life has really been categorized for us. And the list goes on. And I say that, and I begin there, because the purpose of this particular amendment that we are dealing with is to bring us in line with other jurisdictions in the Caribbean that already believe and already accept that indeed we do have different grades of murder, and that all homicides should not attract the death penalty. You've heard from Senator Walker today that we, like Trinidad, we are in violation of the conventions, and even though we did hear from Senator Franklin that some of our ministers go overseas and they sign up and they don't know what they're signing to or signing to. This is not true. This is not true. We are trying to bring Barbados in line with other CARICOM countries to do what we consider to be absolutely necessary at this stage. As I said, there are different grades of homicide, different grades of murder. And this idea, though, is not a novel idea. It is not novel. Because you would know, Mr. President, that from very early, the law recognized that certain homicides would not have attracted the death penalty. The law realized, sir, that there would be certain situations when, in the heat of the moment, a person would understandably do something, commit what we would call, sir, a crime of passion. You will commit a crime of passion. which was a defense to murder. In other words, sir, your mind, in the actual heat of the moment, would be incapable of cool and calm reflection. You would have had no premeditated plan to kill. Your rage, sir, your temper would get the better of you. And the law recognized that and said this particular killing, it could be a defense against murder. Now, sir, the most classic example that you could draw would be a man coming home to his castle and he finds something going on in the bedroom. Not two men, no. I mean his wife and her lover. That's what I mean. And in the heat of the moment, what is there the fellow will use, whether it be a knife, a gun, whatever it is. And as I said, that one, the law said, no, that is a crime of passion. And it was so termed. Of course, everybody is not the same. All people will not react the same way. When I was at school, I remember the chap who sat beside me, he told me of the same incident happening with his uncle. And he said, you know what my uncle did? He went in the next bedroom, and in 10 minutes' time, he was fast asleep. Everybody can't do that. Everybody can't do that. 10 minutes' time, and he was snoring. Now, Sir, I am no social worker like Senator Springer claimed to be. But while on this point, might be a slight diversion, but while on this point, I would like to make an appeal to both Barbadian men and women, particularly the men though, to demonstrate a high level of maturity and responsibility in their relationships. Too often in Barbados, sir, murders, they have their genesis in relationships which have gone bad, which have turned sour. And men in particular seem reluctant to walk away. Much of the problem, to my way of thinking, sir, comes, sir, from the what I call perceived ownership. In other words, the man thinks that he owns the woman. And as you would know, sir, that since the days of slavery, no one in Barbados can claim to own anybody. It matters not how much money you spent on her. It matters not how much rent you've paid for, what higher purchase items you have for, the clothes, nothing of the sort. And this nonsense that I have heard about if I can't get you, nobody else can get you. That, sir, is foolishness, and it is a position which is bereft of reasoning. And the only thing that can do is to get you near to the jail or near to the gallows. Now, my unscientific opinion, sir, is that there are now more people in Barbados who are opposed to the death penalty than there are for those who support it. I think, sir, one of the reasons, whether it be proof or not, is the fact that, as someone has alluded to earlier this morning, I think it was Senator Haynes, this is now about 30 odd years since someone actually, exactly 30, Mr. President is saying, exactly 30 years since someone went to the gallows in this country. And to my way of thinking, sir, this amendment is an attempt to meet those who oppose the death penalty halfway. In fact, in some cases, they think it might meet them more than halfway. It suggests, sir, that certain types of murder, yes, are still deserving of the death penalty. And that is what I want to take a short look at. And I have to say that when I look for drawing examples, I try hard not to draw the examples from Barbadian murders. In fact, in some instances, you can't find the example to draw from the Barbadian murders. So what the act says is that anytime you commit a murder with a high level of brutality, cruelty, depravity, or callousness, that is one that may very well attract the death penalty. Now, I wouldn't try to impose on the Senate description of what I consider to be a heinous crime, the machetes used and all the rest of it. But I would think, so, that a murder in Barbados where the victim suffered 26 stabs could very well come under that category. Where the murder involved calculated or lengthy planning, that too could attract the death penalty. And sir, if I want to go for an example, I would have gone for one that happened in Vegas, where this man had planned a murder. He rented the rooms at a hotel. And that hotel was overlooking a place where you were having a concert. And he got the best vantage point so that he could kill the most people. He did it. He had sophisticated cameras set up so that he could see where the police, when they were coming up, and so on. That is what I call, sir, one with planning. Calculated or lengthy planning. But thankfully, you have to go to Vegas or out of Barbados somewhere to find the example. And long may it remain so. Although, of course, I don't want to get into the habit of saying that it can't happen in Barbados or that it would never happen in Barbados. Then we have here the next one that it says, where the deceased was a judge, a magistrate, DPP, or legal officer in the DPP's department, and the office was a factor. Now, sir, going outside of Barbados again, all of us in here who know something about cricket, we have heard the name Imran Khan. Used to be top all around in the world at one stage. He is now the president of Pakistan. And only a few mornings ago, he had to appeal to the whole of Pakistan for calm and quiet. Because there's a lady called Asia Bibi who is a Christian. She's a Christian. And she had made comparison between our Lord and Savior and the Prophet Muhammad. And she was jailed for blasphemy. She was sentenced to death for blasphemy. And her lawyer appealed. And he won the appeal. Now, the entire Pakistan virtually was in an uproar. She should be there condemned to death. And the last thing I've heard is that the lawyer had to escape from Pakistan. He's now in the USA, UK, seeking asylum, yeah. And that the people are still up in arms calling for him, and they're calling for her. But more importantly, they're calling for the judges who made the decision to acquit her. They're calling for the judges. You see, to them, it is not a matter of what the law is. It is a matter of who the judges are. Who are these judges? Who could actually acquit her for blasphemy? And sir, not only that, as you would know, in places in South America and Central America, where the cartels and the drug lords are more powerful than the politicians or the judiciary, the judges there live in constant fear. We don't have to draw any examples here in Barbados where judges live in fear. Not at all. But don't say it will never happen. I remember when I used to be the Untouchables tent. In fact, when we had a tent called the Untouchables, best tent ever. St. Philip tent. Judges used to go to the Calypso tents in Barbados. You know, judges are that free in Barbados. They go to Calypso tents. You know, judges go to church. We see judges in the supermarket. You know, in some jurisdictions not far from ours, judges are scared to do that. Judges are scared to do that. But you see this, there's sense in it. The deceased was a judge, a magistrate. There's sense in it. Don't say it can't happen. The next one says that the deceased was a member of the Royal Barbados Police Force, the BDF. He was a special constable. He was a prison officer. So once again, what it is saying is that if that is the person who has been murdered, then it's quite possible that the death penalty may attach itself to that murder. Again, sir, I have to emphasize the fact that this change of approach to murder does not apply to Barbados alone. It applies to our neighbors as well, and we must never close our eyes as to what happens next door. Only last week, sir, only last week, the Commissioner of Police in Trinidad literally had to read the Riot Act to Trinidadians, telling them that the police will pursue anyone who kills or attempts to kill a police officer during the line of his duty. He had to tell Trinidad that because that police force was under constant threat. people. Again, 2 weeks ago, I was listening to a call-in program where I heard a Jamaican gentleman who is now living here in Barbados. And he was saying that the reason he left Jamaica was because of the violence. But he went on to say that he's very concerned about his son, who is still in Jamaica, and who is a policeman there. And that he's trying every day to encourage him, the son, to come to Barbados and join the police force here. I think, sir, that that is one of the best testimonials that Barbados could get. One of the best testimonials we could get, that someone can say, leave over there where you're bred and born and come over here where I know you would be a lot safer. Still, I urge you not to say, can't happen here. And quite recently too, because they also mention here the prison officers. And quite recently too, in Trinidad, a superintendent of prisons, he was gunned down. Gunned down. And the president of the Prison Officers Association in Trinidad, he said that for the past, I think it was past 10 years, that 20 prison officers had been murdered. 20 prison officers had been murdered in Trinidad. Innocent, God-fearing prison officers whose only crime would have been to be working at the prison. And he said that they, the prison officers, had become soft targets, and that such killings were an attempt to undermine the security forces. We do not believe, sir, that prison officers or police officers are better than anyone else. This is not the reason for identifying them. The point is that they are our security officers. Indeed, sir, in some neighboring jurisdictions, parents discourage their sons, in particular, they discourage them from joining the police force or from becoming prison officers. Being a member of the security forces in certain jurisdictions is extremely dangerous work. And if this trend continues, let's hope it doesn't sweep the Caribbean, because we would have nobody in place to uphold law and order. And of course, this is what that criminal element wants. Mr. President, another one of these instances is where the deceased was a member of a group of persons who have a common characteristic such as race, nationality, ethnicity, or religion, and this was a factor. This world has changed significantly over the past 4 or 5 decades. And we have living across this globe millions of unrepentant extremists and fanatics. You can imagine, sir, that you can look at a young 18-year-old boy and tell him that if he straps explosives on himself and drives a motor vehicle into that crowd over there, and he kills everybody, including himself, that he will end up going what is their equivalent of heaven, where there are 5 or 10 beautiful virgins awaiting him. And that is precisely why he does it. He does it. You could imagine that you could tell someone in Barbados to do that, and no, sir. 5 virgins. And that's the reason. Thankfully, as I said, we haven't yet reached that level of fanaticism. And there are fanatics who hate special groups so badly. And they make some statements such as, I am on a mission to rid this world of, whether it be gays or blacks or Jews or transvestites or Christians. But there are people who hate specific groups. They just hate them. And they strike fear into the hearts of these groups. If I had my way, they would say, I would not leave a single Jew or a single Christian or a single gay person on the face of this earth. That is the way they speak. Some groups are small. Recently, there was someone sending some explosives, potentially explosive packages to, it started with people like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Eric Holder. And, it's just a particular group. You hate the group and you want to kill them. You do the worst possible thing to them. This is a world, sir, that is now full of radicals. There was one fanatic recently, only about, could be 2 weeks ago at the most. Fella, his name is Robert Bowers. And he killed 11 Jews in a synagogue. 11 Jews in Pittsburgh in a synagogue. For no other reason than the fact that they were Jews. And he had a shootout with the police and got injured. He ended up in hospital. And would you believe that the best nurse he had in that hospital treating him was a male nurse who was a Jew? And his mission was to kill all the Jews. But he ended up being well served by a Jew. That is the world we live in. And so, it says that the deceased was a witness or a juror pending or concluding trial. So, if you kill a witness or if you kill a juror, that too might attract the death penalty. Sir, in one of our neighboring islands, there were approximately 15 witnesses in a well-known and a well-publicized case. Sir, by the time that case came to trial, every single witness had been killed. Every single one had been killed. Murdered. I say again, sir, that thankfully, we have not reached that stage, and long may it remain that way. Where the jurors are concerned, what I know is that the trial is going on with this, perhaps the biggest drug lord ever, Guzman. And the jurors on that case have to be under surveillance from the court, at the court, wherever they are. There have to be a gang of soldiers around them. This is the world we live in. I have heard of attempts here in Barbados of people trying to get close to jurors, but thankfully I don't think it is anything that we need to worry about. But I am glad that this is what we have been part of the statute. Mr. President, as I close, I say that I support the amendment. I say too that there is perhaps one little problem that I have, one little matter that I have a little problem with. And it says that these are circumstances where the death penalty may be applied. M-A-Y, may. I would have thought that having gone to pains to tell us these are the ones we consider to be the serious ones. And the way I feel about it, certainly I feel about it, I did not expect the word to be may. I did not expect the word to be may. Shall would have sent a stronger message from me. Shall would have sent a much stronger message to me. Because as it stands now, with the amendment and with the word may, you can still commit one of these heinous crimes that we've gone through. And may. In other words, you may still avoid the death penalty. And as I said, I am a strong supporter of the death penalty these days. I'm obliged to you, Mr. President.
Any more, please?
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, Mr. President, good afternoon. I rise to lend my voice to this debate. I am a little hoarse, but I had a few things I wanted to say, so I decided that in spite of my voice level and hoarseness, although there are 3 doctors in the chamber, so maybe next time I will not be as hoarse when I do rise. Barbados is traditionally a place of law and order. As my colleague said just a few minutes ago, we have not reached the same place as many other jurisdictions. Yes, we have murders. I am told there are about 20 odd murders or so each year in Barbados. One murder is one murder too many, so we really would not like to have any at all. But it's a reality. And the reason for that, there are many reasons for that. But let's just say that conflict resolution is always a difficult matter. And people oftentimes are not able to solve issues that confront them. And they then resort to some of the most basal aspect of celebrating that then oftentimes results in what we see then as these murders. Someone asked me a couple of weeks ago what I thought about what they perceived, this was a journalist, as upsurge in violence in young people. Because there were some things circulating showing school children involved in all sorts of violent behavior. Some of it was current, some wasn't. And they asked me what I thought, and if I thought that there was an issue, and if there was, in fact, upsurge in violence amongst the young people, school children. I told him I'm not sure if it is any greater than it had been in the past, but I do notice it now, being in a situation where I get it, where the opportunity to see it is there. And they then asked what I thought were some of the reasons for it. And I said one word: the adults. So they said, the adults? I said, yes, the adults. Children are children, and children will always be children. They're not anything else like some of the people have said about them. They're just children. And because of they're of a certain age and of a certain psychological development, their behaviors then would not necessarily be as measured or as an older individual. But when you have situations where adults are going on to school premises and grabbing children and assaulting them, little children, primary school level children, adults going there and thinking it's okay to resolve their displeasure about a situation that may happen by assaulting a 9-year-old child. It's clearly not acceptable. When you have other adults going on to other school premises and attempting to assault or behave in violent type behavior, that's also not acceptable. Because when young people see adults behaving in this manner, they then see that as a way to resolve their conflicts. I really believe that we need to take stock as a nation and look at how we ourselves approach conflict, to understand that our own methodology of doing so will result in what the generations to come do in resolving theirs. A couple months ago, about that now, I was going home from work one evening, and I saw a man being assaulted, hit in the back of his head in a gas station with what I thought was a little axe. 2 men in a fight. It wasn't an axe, though. It was actually I think it's a hatchet. It told me it was something that is used by masons when they do their work. Yeah, a hatchet. But you know, when the police asked me what happened, I described what I saw. And that's what it looked like to me, because I don't know anything about masonry work. But nevertheless, to me it was stunning. These 2 men talking, all of a sudden there's a fight, and next thing you know, one is on the ground, meaning lying flat on the ground, and he's hitting the other one in the back of his head. Well, you would know the rest of it. Everyone's scattered out of fear, etc. But one or two people stayed to assist him until the ambulance came and the police arrived to take him away. They told me then that the 2 men were, the following day, intoxicated. They had too much to drink, but they were friends. And even though they were friends, because they were obviously drunk and not and I think the lawyers here will call it diminished capacity, the 2 friends end up in a violent confrontation. Now, when you think of these things, he didn't die, but had he died, then how would his friend feel when he's now sober? Would his friend who's now sober deserve, if he had died and was convicted of murder, to get the death penalty? I don't know. That's really for a court to decide, not for me. But these are real life things that I'm here talking about today. Recently, someone threatened me on WhatsApp. I was stunned that you threaten people. I hand it over to police because I certainly believe that any threat to do you bodily harm should be taken seriously, and not to do so would be foolhardy. And then recently here again, as I was involved in my duties within government, I had to go to a government department because this department was involved in the layoffs, the retrenchment of government employees. And one of the workers at a very senior level in the department was threatened, again by WhatsApp, because a lot of people who want to threaten to do you bodily harm or to kill you, they like to use the cowardice of hiding behind social media, a cell phone, WhatsApp, in order to strike fear into individuals. And the poor lady who they threatened, she was obviously quite distressed and very upset because she is not doing anything besides her job. And then, not satisfied with threatening her, they then threatened her mother. Now, why would you threaten the mother of a government employee doing her job? It makes absolutely no sense. Why does this occur? Because there's an anonymity behind WhatsApp and social media. And people right now are using it to spread all sorts of lies and propaganda. But more disturbing is that it's one thing to just say something, but it's another thing to use language, innuendos, and different aspects to engender hatred, which is then what results in people then wanting to hurt or harm an individual. It is one thing to say something. It is another thing to change the language to ensure that you send a message of hatred so that people will then want to engage in inappropriate behavior of wanting to do people bodily harm. I say this whole situation of people engaged in that type of activity and behavior is simply abhorrent. There's no other word for it. We really need to take stock and introspect and think about some of these true incidents that I've just described that are currently taking place here within the last couple of weeks. Nevertheless, this debate is about the death penalty, the removal of it as a mandatory sentence. Unlike my colleague on the other side who spoke earlier, I have complete confidence in the CCJ and our legal system. I know Senator Franklin did express some reservations about the legal system. Mr. President. However, there is no perfect system in life, but the Barbados legal system has been held locally and abroad in high esteem. It has been considered to be one of the best systems worldwide. When my colleague, Mr. President, was speaking, at first I thought I was asleep when I heard him denigrating the CCJ. I said, I thought maybe, Senator Franklin, maybe I was asleep. I wasn't sure I was hearing what I was hearing. And then he was denigrating the court system. I said, I said, our court system is CCJ, or maybe I'm sleeping. And then I said, well, no, maybe I'm Dawah Jenkins. Because he started railing then against the decisions of the courts when it comes to the sentencing of individuals, the processing of cases, and all the other things that make up the legal system. There's no perfect system, but this system in Barbados protects everyone. It protects innocent people. It also protects sometimes guilty people. There's no perfect system, but you must have one that certainly is not continually bashed by people simply because it suits them without any real empirical data to show that there's something wrong, intrinsically wrong with the system. And then I really then thought I was in a twilight zone when he started talking about the discrimination by different individuals in the system, simply because of people's socioeconomic condition and or their race. I don't know. I think Barbados, the majority of Barbadians are people, are black people, like majority, not all, but the majority. I'm not sure how many judges and prosecutors and policemen and all the other people that make up the legal system that are of a different race, but they're certainly a minority. So if the discrimination, Mr. President, is being done against people based on race, then it's people of your own race discriminated against your own race. Then, I wasn't sure when I heard my colleague, Senator Franklin, speak again. I said, for sure, I cannot be in the Senate chamber. I must be down the bus stand. He next then took a swipe at the Honourable President of the Chamber in terms of a case in which he was involved. Now, as I said, as I said just now, when we as adults, for whatever reason, just decide to behave in a certain way, denigrate things, what then message are we sending to people out there? There's no other system but this system. There's no other court system for ours, for us, we as Barbadians, besides the system that we have here on our island. And I can tell you this, for me personally, having lived and worked in many countries, I'd rather be here in this system that we have here in Barbados. I can say that, not 10%, but 100% I am certain I'd rather be right here on this rock called BIM and this system we have here. Now, I then thought about it, and I realized then part of the problem, Mr. President, why sometimes people make comments. You know, sometimes people who are like paralegals and so on, they become a little confused with the magnitude and the complexity of trying to grasp the procedures that are required for adjudicating certain legal matters. They may not have the necessary training.
Who's this?
People who make comments about issues, legal issues, without empirical data to try to denigrate an entire system. Barbados is a mature democracy, and Barbadians are primarily mature people. And when we as a country decided to go to the CCJ and make that our final appellate court, our court of determination, away from the Privy Council, there was no divide between the then government and the opposition. Everybody was in agreement. There was no, we didn't go to a referendum, we didn't have to go to a referendum and because one set of people said no, one set of people said yes. Both sides said yes. This is where we need to go. We can determine our own fate. We don't have to go somewhere thousands of miles away to get people who have never, don't even know what the Caribbean looks like in some cases, except what they see on TV, to determine our fate. We decided people like us could determine our fate here in the Caribbean. And there's really nothing wrong with that. That is what many countries do. They determine their own fate. We decided to do it, as was said earlier by Senator Boyce, under the Treaty of Chagaramas, to do it as a collective unit. Economies of scale, that would be why. And they also want a certain level of independence as well. And once you understand that, you would understand why we as Barbadians go to the Caribbean Court of Justice. Yes, I know there are some of our Caribbean brothers and sisters that have not done so, but they would have to make those decisions for themselves. We have already made the decision for ourselves. Nevertheless, let me get back to the substantive matter that we're here to debate, Mr. President, which is this matter of the adjustment to ensure that the death penalty is not a mandatory sentence and that judges are given the ability to be able to make determinations and have varied sentencing for conviction of murder. When you consider that aspect, my colleague that spoke earlier, Senator Greenwich, I will not go over all the things he said. I don't need to. He was very, very explicit and spoke at length about the need for having discretionary powers in sentencing. And he's correct. Every time someone commits an offense, especially murder, you must have the ability to not have a mandatory sentence because of all the other aspects that may be involved as to why, when that murder may have been committed. And so that's why I am in 100% in agreement with the amendment to this act. And I believe that is the right way for us to go. And as I said before, this debate today is not about abolishing the death penalty, far from it. I think Senator Walcott, when he spoke, clearly articulated that and clearly explained that this is simply in order to comply with a decision by the CCJ as well as the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And that is the reason that we're here today. Not to decide whether the death penalty should stay or it should go. We have said many, many times that whenever that discussion comes up on a national level, we will go to referendum and let Barbadians decide. That is what democracies do. So, in closing, Mr. President, I just want to say that I'm 100% in support of this, and that I hope that my colleagues sit down and think about some of the things I said here today with regard to the incitement of violence, the things that you do and the word and things that you say, and how you engage in the new technology age with this new media, and how people use it oftentimes to hide behind it in order to incite people to do some terrible things. I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moore. I now recognize Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I join with my colleagues this afternoon. It seems as though there's consensus, Mr. Deputy President, that the proposed bills will be agreed to by all. And so, rather than repeat what was said so eloquently and so comprehensively by my colleagues, I just wanted to highlight a few components of the various pieces of legislation that I would have noticed in support of the legislation. I note and I agree and I have understood that we are not dealing with the death penalty, but we are dealing with making the practice and the carrying out of the law more efficient and more in keeping with the times and the various bodies to which we subscribe. I believe that the suite of legislation is comprehensive. It covers what needs to be covered in order to effect the necessary amendments. For me, in particular, I was pleased to see, as it relates to the amendments to the Penal System Reform Act, consideration taken in relation to victims. I think it's important that we always remember that arising out of a murder, there will be victims. We tend to focus on rehabilitation, deterrence of the offender. But we don't tend to focus. I'm not saying we don't remember or we don't pay them any mind, but the focus is not ordinarily on the victim. And I noticed in the proposed bill for penal reform that there was specific reference to hearing from victims as it relates to the guidelines for judicial sentencing. And in particular, Mr. Deputy President, at clause 41, subclause 2E, in sentencing an offender, the court shall take into account the following guidelines. Mr. Deputy President, E says the manner in which the offender executed the offense and the nature and duration of the relationship between the offender and the victim. G, and any attempt on the part of the offender to make reparation to the victim or the victim's family. H, the need for the rehabilitation of the offender and the need to promote a sense of responsibility on the part of the offender for the harm done to the victim. I like that one. You can't bring back the deceased, but you have to acknowledge that there has been a death, a murder. Somebody's not coming back. Somebody's father, mother, sister, brother, child. It's important, and that is, and the possibility of providing restitution for the harm done by the offender. But if you kill me, there's not enough money. So don't bother with me. You cannot do restitution for my family. You cannot afford it, even if the government helps you. You can't. But the fact that you are taking into consideration the victims and going as far as looking at restitution is commendable, and it's important, and it is vital, and I can support that one. I think I should write down the words I'm using, support. In that regard, my people understood. My people understood. My people understood. Senator McCartney, don't show. So in that regard, that's a good. I hope, though, that this legislation, we will be careful to ensure that we don't go to the other extreme where you have a situation where there's discontent because of a lenient or perceived lenient sentence, Mr. Deputy President. But I'm happy because it would allow for healing, and when you have the victim included, it allows for, I think, a better interaction with the public and the public sentiment, and less acrimony, as Senator Moore speaks to. We're trying to get rid of this season of hate and encouraging hate. And I think that the acknowledgement and taking into consideration the victims is vital and important. Thank you, Senator Holder. I beg your pardon, government senators. It is in keeping with the caring government of the Barbados Labour Party. Oh my goodness gracious. Mr. Mr. Deputy President, are going to mash up the table in the Senate. I realize that not one of y'all has said this afternoon, but I can say it. Victims matter. Victims matter. Pardon me? I'm moving on. I don't do asides. I get in trouble. The other one I wanted to highlight, I noticed for the Criminal Procedure Act that there's going to be provision for psychiatric evaluations. I think Senator Drake's mentioned. I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of that. That's not, I'm staying in my lane. I don't know anything about anything medical. What I would say, though, from a legal perspective is that this would need to be managed in such a way that if the evaluation is ongoing while the case is going on, that it is managed in such a way that that does not prejudice the accused case. It's very important that that is managed in such a way, because if a jury hears it, it's possible that it could affect the outcome. I'm just saying. So I expect that that would be managed in a way that will look after the accused, because the accused has rights until he doesn't, and even then he still has rights, I think. But it will positively impact defenses of insanity and diminished responsibility. So in that regard, it would probably lead to, at least theoretically, a more accurate application of the various defenses with the implementation of psychiatric evaluation. So that's another plus in the suite of legislation. As it relates to the offenses against the person, I believe that the proposed amendments would allow for more consistency in the imposition of the death penalty, and that, by extension, should provide more comfort to the public in relation to the duration of incarceration where particularly life imprisonment is imposed. So those would be my few comments in support of this proposed suite of legislation. I am not going to go into any details about drafting. You'll be happy to hear. Get through this afternoon. With those words, Mr. Deputy President, I am extremely obliged to you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I rise to add my voice in support of the repeal of the mandatory imposition of the death penalty for the offense of murder, and that the options available to the judges be expanded through the amendments that we're making to this legislation. So, Deputy President, whether we think that the death penalty should be ended or defended, whether we want to debate its morality, its constitutionality, or its fair application, and whether we consider ourselves to be sovereign rights activists, human rights advocates, death penalty abolitionists, or Christian soldiers. I would say that we have seen from this debate that there has been considerable passion and excitement and genuine desire to be supportive of the direction in which this amendment is going. And even if we have not been impacted like you have, Deputy President, at a very personal level with someone who has been a victim or even a perpetrator of a wrong to which death penalty might apply, I know that we all find ourselves drawn into the stories of this country. And in preparing for this debate, I would have spoken to a number of persons who had different feelings about the death penalty. And some believe that the prisons are fully capable of protecting citizens from criminals, and therefore life in prison is just well enough for them. There are some who believe that the death penalty would be a deterrent, and despite my research into the studies of studies, the meta-studies on this, there seems to be no conclusion, really. No conclusive evidence that says it is or it is not a deterrent. And, Mr. Deputy President, there are those who also said that the death penalty imposes an irrevocable sentence so that if we make a mistake, there is no do-over. And I've spent much of the day enjoying the presentations of the senators in here. And one of the things I want to suggest, Mr. Deputy President, is that we use this opportunity to have a much wider discussion. Much of the conversation we have had has been about what happens to a person after they've committed a crime and how will they be penalized. There is significant research that shows that if we are able to intervene sooner in effective ways, that the frequency with which our young people and our people get to that point of having to be penalized, that can in fact be mitigated. I think it is important for us to understand that even when we have had some people who have run afoul of the law or who have demonstrated bad behavior, that not all of them are born bad with the genetic predisposition to grow up criminals. And I say that, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, because I've had the opportunity in a previous life, professional life of mine, to work closely with young people. And I've also had the opportunity to speak with police officers and others who work very closely with young people who can sometimes become the subjects in the kinds of amendments we are now talking about to this legislation. And if you would permit, just for me to link what we can do if we are able to create a primary diversion up front, if we are able to provide second chances with redirection to those who show some bad behavior early, and what we can do with proper behavior modification. Mr. President, I would like perhaps to share just two examples and ask my senators to indulge me. But just two examples of things happening right here in Barbados, where we have seen results that are encouraging, that help us to head off some of these young people from heading down the road where they will end up part of the penal system. As you would have heard some of our colleagues say earlier, there is no system, no program indeed, that is perfect. And none of these two is. Not one of them is. However, I wanted to share with my colleagues some work that has been done by the Royal Barbados Police Force with regards to the Juvenile Liaison Scheme. It is a program that works with young people up to the age of 16 who either have been referred to the Juvenile Liaison Scheme because of behavioral issues. It could be, you're not behaving well, you're not coming home, you're being rude, you're giving your parents trouble. Or who have had some minor criminal offenses. You went in a store and you robbed a purse. You took up a purse, it was your first offense, you were young, etc. And what that program does is that it takes these young persons who are very early in going the wrong way in their antisocial behavior, and it puts them through a 6-month supervision and counseling program. It also offers them some assistance in terms of behavior modification. There is also a parents' forum, understanding that sometimes when you see a problem child, they're probably dealing with a problem environment, and that the parents too have to hold some responsibility. So some support is also given to the parents through the parent forum. There is also the opportunity for parents or schools even, or even the criminal system to refer candidates to this particular scheme. And of late, what we have seen, and I wouldn't even say just of late, we have seen that the police officers who have charge of this program are not simply waiting for referrals to come to them particularly from the school system. They are reaching out to the schools, having conversations with the principals, and seeking to put things in place before it reaches that point. I shared that program to say that there have been some encouraging statistics that have come out of that. The last statistic that I am told by the responsible persons that's reliable in terms of tracking persons from that program was back in about 2010. And at that time, it showed that close to that only about 20% of the young people they were tracking actually found themselves back in the system after going through that program. Basically, what that is saying is about 80% may have been redirected through that. Now, I accept that the studies may not have been as scientific, and I would suggest that more longitudinal studies be done to be able to track these persons after they've gone through the program to truly understand their impact. But simply from these simple statistics that I have seen, here is a program that intervenes before they get into the penal system in a significant way to help. Another program that has been instituted right here in Barbados is the Prince's Trust. There's a team program also that is being run. Barbados is fairly new into this program. And in fact, we have now run about 4 cohorts, starting with anywhere about 12 to 15 young people at this time. That program is for 16 to 25. So after you would have passed through the juvenile scheme, here is a program that captures persons who are in the 16 to 25 age group. It's a 12-week self-development program, and it is targeted for at-risk. At-risk being defined as not in school, not engaged in employment or in any self-employment business, whether they're employed or in their own business. Now, there is a residential component, and there's a community project component as well to this. And I believe that some of my colleagues may have heard about some of the work this program would have done at St. Elizabeth in terms of building the park, etc., getting these young people engaged in meaningful, structured, and supervised activity. Now, coming out of that program, which is fairly recent for Barbados, started in, I think, around 2016 or thereabout, the reports that I am getting is that some 70% of those who complete the program either go back to school, go to vocational education, or they go and they get a job. Now, there are many other programs I can talk about where we are seeking to create that primary diversion before. One of the things, but I will stop here because I know that it is late in the day and many of you will want to go a little earlier today. But what I want to say also is that programs like these can also benefit from further studies that help us to understand the phenomenon that's called peer contagion. The peer contagion, whereby there's evidence that supports that the influence of peer relationships can be significant in terms of growth of problem behavior in youth. And what we need to understand, and I do not think it is sufficiently well researched in Barbados, is the conditions under which these peer contagion effects are most pronounced. And with that evidence, inform our own programs using mind, brain, and behavioral sciences as the underpinning science that informs them. One of the things we want to understand is how best we will be able to serve our young people encountering deviant behavior, particularly in the 4 key institutional settings in which we encounter high risk and delinquent behavior: in education, in mental health, in juvenile justice, and at the community level. I submit, Mr. Deputy President, that this is a conversation that is worth us having. These are studies worth doing. This is evidence worth having. There is tracking of these young people who go through these programs that's worth doing so that we can truly understand how we can head off the problems before our young people reach the penal system. And the connection, therefore, I believe is obvious of that. It is in the interest of the people, the young people especially of this country, that I appeal to all who are here to continue to give resources of time, of money, to volunteer, to be part of these programs. We all talk about what ought to be done. It is important that we all, at whatever level we can, seek to get involved to be part of the solution before our young people get into the penal system. And so in support of this bill, Mr. Deputy President, I offer my support because the amendments reserve our right as a country to choose to keep the death penalty on the books or not. The amendments give our judges options in sentencing. And these amendments bring Barbados in compliance with the ruling of the CCJ, which, whether we like it or not, is the highest court of judgment for this country. With these few words, I'm obliged to you, Mr. President. Yes.
I recognize Senator Holder.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I assume that this is the penultimate presentation this afternoon. Against that backdrop, I do not wish to detain the chamber too long, but I wish to make a contribution in light of earlier submissions, particularly that sought to quote the sacred text. Now, Mr. Deputy President, I get the sense that we all agree in this chamber today with the proposed amendments. I don't think that when the question is put, there will be any nays. We are all in agreement. I am particularly pleased that a lot of my colleagues, I dare say, I don't know, I can even see on the other side, because today they're definitely not, there's no other side today, Mr. Deputy President. There's one side today. And so when I hear persons even commenting about Senator Franklin, I said to someone earlier, just leave him. He will soon come, he's going to soon come to Christian understanding. And we'll see him also showing his real colors, his true colors, very shortly. So there's no need whatsoever, Mr. Deputy President. But I want to begin by referencing a quote from Martin Luther King, Jr. at the height of the civil rights movement. He said, "It is true that the law cannot make someone love you, but it can stop them from lynching you." And I reflected on that quote, and I said to myself, there's so much truism and such a profound message in that. The law cannot make anyone love you. But in his situation, he was advocating that with the right legislative provision, the law can protect persons of his race, I believe at the time, from being unfairly and unjustly treated. And therefore, this took me to what I consider to be the foundation really for these laws. We all agree. When we look at our history, I believe the leader of government business took us back this morning. Thank you, Mr. President. The leader of government business took us this morning in his presentation to maybe the origin of capital punishment and some types of capital punishment that existed before. I would even take him even further back to the Greeks and to the Romans, and we saw that those who espouse the Christian views would realize that the Romans had one of the worst types, and that was death on the tree. Death on the tree, or what we call death on the cross. It's really death on the tree, but we refer to it as death on the cross. And it is from this that I believe people have interpreted a portion of scripture taken from Genesis 9. Reverend Maxwell referred to it earlier. At verse 6, Mr. President, it said, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by his blood shall be shed." And this is considered a law of God. It is outside of the Mosaic law, and it was given at the time when we understand there to be new beginnings after a flood. Now, this particular concept, Mr. President, has been understood by many a civilization that there must be the giving of a life for a life. There are those who speak to it being a deterrent. This law was never given, Mr. President, to deter anyone from doing anything. It was given simply as a law that says if you do something, then this is what will occur. And I see Senator Maxwell smiling, because it was never intended to be any deterrent. It was a law that was placed to help govern mankind. And the fact is, Mr. President, irrespective of what you believe, irrespective of what your faith is, irrespective of what your morals even, and your religious moorings are, there are laws, immutable laws, that you can do nothing about, Mr. President. You have but only to accept them. And I give this example by way of illustration. There is a natural law called gravity. Now we can sit in this chamber and in the other place, and we can introduce legislation that even incentivizes people to go on top of high buildings and jump. We can pass legislation that says if you do so, you will get a tax credit. Mr. President, you can. The fact is, that is what is known as a natural law, that if you go on a high building and you jump off, that law of gravity is going to pull you down to the earth. This is why we are able to walk on the earth and not have to fear in a simple walk falling, because of the law of gravity. In other words, there is a natural law that you can do nothing about but accept it. It is considered immutable. And it is against that backdrop, Mr. President, that I'm suggesting to us that those who would go through scripture and would quote and so on need to understand a few things. The first is that there are some universal laws that are to be found in there that you don't have to agree. They will still exist. You don't have to agree with it. You don't even have to like them. They will still exist. And they're not there to deter anything. They are there, I believe, as a creationist. They've been placed there, Mr. President, to help keep a sense of balance in the universe. Those who study universal law understand the concept of balance. There is balance. There must be balance in order for us to exist and survive. And so when I hear persons quoting the text from Exodus, I realize that many people quote the eye for the eye and the tooth for the tooth, and really sometimes I understand they have no hermeneutical experience. If you understand hermeneutics, it says to you that in interpretation of the text, Mr. President, you have to bear in mind that their audiences, first thing, their audiences. The text had at least 3 audiences. And if you're not one of those 3, and you read something that doesn't pertain to you, you will run off, misinterpret, and do the wrong thing. Their audiences, there are some cultural realities, there are language differences. When the text was written, it was written in languages, Mr. President, that even in our own English language, there are still no words that can be used to help explain a particular word or verse, etc. Now, I say all that to say that you have to be very careful. Those who shout out the eye for the eye and the tooth for the tooth do not appreciate and or understand the context of that. That was a part of the Mosaic law. Mosaic law was given to Jews. We are not Jews. Matter of fact, within the context of the scriptures, we are considered Gentiles. We are not Jews. So it is not applicable. Now, Mr. President, I'm sure you're wondering, well, okay, but you're saying 2 things that seem to be the same. One is, on the one hand, there is universal law. Immutable, it applies to everyone, irrespective, you cannot change it. And then there's moral law, natural law, etc. And within the text, there's certain religious law. And that portion that relates to the Exodus, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, religious law refers to the Mosaic law. It is not applicable to us, and particularly in this 2018 experience that we are going through. So with that short background, the question then is, how do we interpret what we have been doing today relative to these pieces of legislation that seek to look at removing the mandatory death penalty? The question is, should there be a death penalty in the first place? Mr. President, unlike my colleague, Senator Maxwell, I personally agree with the view that there must be some form of capital punishment, primarily because it is required by divine law. I believe that. This is not a debate, I understand. Whenever it comes up, I will get the opportunity to speak to it at length, why it is. I believe that. I do not agree with Senator Greenidge that the majority of Barbadians at this point in time do not support that. I hold to the survey that was done. The leader of government business mentioned it this morning. Unlike others in this chamber, I believe that Cadres is a credible pollster. And so I think that if they would have done some research just last year that showed that even though it's declining, still the majority of Barbadians support capital punishment. It is, Mr. President, a part of the divine law given to us. However, while we interpret that and understand that, along the way, the Creator himself has given us the opportunity, Mr. President, to apply that concept within our societies, within our civilizations, according to the degree of activity. And this is where I think the issue is for us relative to this debate. The degree of activity. You ask me, well, what are you referring to? Again, another section of text, this time from Joshua. Here's Joshua 20, and here's Joshua 20 introducing, in the first couple of verses, he says, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood." Now, what is the concept? This was introduced under law, yes, but there's a concept that is applicable to us, and that is that the Creator has said that he's going to make provision, he's going to allow for provision for degrees of murder, degrees of homicide, etc. So this piece of legislation, in my view, is in sync, Mr. President, with the intention, I believe, of our Creator. That just as there was the city of refuge, there were 6 cities in Israel and Judah that the Levites had responsibility for. 6 cities that allowed persons to run to and seek asylum from the avenger in the event that there was accidental death, in the event that there was manslaughter, etc. They could have run to these cities of refuge and find asylum. Now, in interpreting that, it tells me that given our judges the flexibility to apply the penalty is in sync with what our Creator would have it to be. It is in sync, Mr. President. Now, the truth is, what I would have loved to see is that we were able to define maybe the degrees of murder. And what do I mean by that? I am an ardent fan of detective pictures. Mr. President, I love CSI, I love Law and Order, FBI, etc., etc. I love them. I love to sit and watch, and I believe now that I can speak with a level of certainty that within about 10 minutes of the picture, I can determine who the murderer is. I can determine that within about 10 minutes of watching the picture. Right? So I love these. But what I find, what I've taken note of, is that you will always hear the prosecutor in particular speak to first-degree murder, second-degree murder, murder in the third degree. And depending on the ability to prosecute and be able to charge an individual based on any of those degrees, then the sentence is applicable. Mr. President, I would have thought that we would go there, and that we would have gone there to at least look at having degrees of crime and be able to classify them accordingly, and as a result have then our judges so armed with that legislative provision that they can apply the appropriate sentence based on the degree. Now, if we do, that is great. But that, I think, ought to be maybe another discussion. If we have not been able to put that in place, that is where I think we ought to go. But for sure, Mr. President, giving our judges now the provision to assess, analyze the evidence, and is not bound, it is not mandatory that the death penalty applies, I think is a step in the right direction. We heard from others today speaking of the social issues and so on, but I thought it necessary. See, our chambers begin, with prayer, we begin referencing scripture and so on. It's because we are all creationists, because we understand that there is a supreme being. And if that is the case, then we want to know that when we sit in these chambers to pass laws, that we are doing so conscious of the laws that he has given us to follow in the first place. So, Mr. President, I want to conclude by suggesting we are on the right track. This indeed is in sync with the laws that we have been given by the one who created us. And so I support the amendments, the removal of the mandatory death penalty, and as I said, I call at some point in time, Mr. President, that we look, if we haven't already found, I didn't see it in any of my readings, but we look at different degrees of crime that would allow for the different kind of penalties and so on to be applied. With those few words, I'm obliged.
Mr. President, I rise to lend my support to this bill. I shan't be long. I promise you. I sense a certain level of tiredness around the table, not because of the debate itself, because I think it was a very robust and very interesting debate, but I think it's because of the lateness of the evening. So I shall try to be as brief as possible. We know, of course, that these amendments are in response to this recent CCJ ruling and, of course, rulings of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And that it was absolutely necessary. We had no choice, that we would have to do these amendments a little bit tardy because the ruling by the Inter-American Human Rights Court happened back in, I believe, as early as 2004. And we have had other indications from, if we use examples from the Privy Council and so on, that this was coming. This was coming. So here we are. And I think for some time we had given our commitment to make these changes and to amend, to bring our laws in line with the international conventions. And so here we are. But I think conceptually, we were moving in this direction for some time. As we heard earlier, we've had no executions in Barbados now for, I believe it's over 30 years. The Barbados Privy Council has been continuously commuting the death penalty to life or to some shorter periods. And something that I have noticed, I don't have statistics on it, but there was a time a few years ago when it seemed to me that there were most of our charges going before the court were for manslaughter rather than for murder. And, I wondered at one stage if it was for reasons to avoid or to get around the mandatory nature of the mandatory requirement to have the death penalty. So we have been working on it. This really is now just to put the legislation on the statute books. And as I said, I support this. When we look around the world, or in fact, if you look at the list of countries that have still maintained the death penalty up to this point, it is interesting to note that the majority of countries on that list are either Asian countries, countries in the Caribbean, and to some extent in Africa. And the African countries have actually been moving very swiftly towards the abolition of the death penalty as well. So we are going to find ourselves, if we don't continue to seriously look at the death penalty, have a serious discussion on it. I heard Senator Sands in his presentation earlier, excellent presentation, I have to add, was adamant, was very specific in making the point, we're not talking about abolishing the death penalty, but only about the mandatory death penalty. I ask, why not? Why shouldn't we be talking about possibly removal or abolishing the death penalty as well? And Senator Walcott did indicate that at some point in time we have to have that discussion. And so I hope that with a lot of things that the country is currently in discussion, so we may not have time to have it may be too distracting right now to have that discussion, but later on we need to have it. I know, and I listened very carefully to Senator Greenidge, very passionate speech, and he, of course, it hit fairly close to home that he experienced it, and it caused him to change his whole outlook or his whole views as to whether or not the death penalty should be abolished or not. But I think that discussion will transcend politics, your political persuasions, your ideologies, and so on will take over in that discussion. And I truly look forward to being part of it. It is interesting to note also, Mr. Deputy President, that the church, the Catholic Church, and we heard a lot about religion and religious things this evening, but the Catholic Church in particular has very recently come out also. Pope Francis has said that the death penalty, the position of the church, the Catholic Church now, is the death penalty can never be sanctioned because it attacks the inherent dignity of all human beings. So that is something we will have, will also, I suppose, take into consideration and help to inform us when we have that discussion. Also, we will perhaps have to discuss whether or not it is really a deterrent. That tends to be the underlying thing for keeping it on the statute books. But I would suggest that if you look to the north, our neighbors in the north or our neighbors in the south, I think both still have that on their statute book, the death penalty on their statute books. And I wonder how much of a deterrent it is in those circumstances. Here in Barbados, it seems to me that the instances of murder arise from perhaps two different categories. They tend to be domestic issues, and then the other category, which seems to be younger people dealing with conflict. And it was very interesting to listen to Senator McConney's presentation about some ideas that we may need to implement to help our people to get over these issues, which could help us to deal and to manage the anger and help to deal with conflict. I had actually jotted down things like, my suggestion was that perhaps the time has come that we make sure that in all of our schools, it is mandatory for every student to be involved in some kind of extracurricular activity, whether it be the cadets or the scouts or the brownies or guides or whatever. Yeah. That, or other things like getting involved in music or dancing classes or whatever. But I think it is very important that we have that level of involvement, which I think will help to can help to deal with those issues relating to resolving conflict and so on. Those persons who, for example, play cricket and football and so on, know how those sorts of organizations and those sorts of groupings, very well managed, can help to mold young persons' lives and help them with building character. And I'm sure Senator Greenidge and some of the older ones among us will remember going to cricket on Saturday evenings and watching cricket and then sitting at the feet of some of our masters and being coached and having real life discussions. And I think that helped a number of us, most of us, to be able to deal with a number of the issues and the challenges that we have in our lives. So I think, Mr. President, there's a lot of work for us to do. This is just, this is the legislation part of it, which we are fixing, but we can't legislate behaviors. And that is really where the big issue is. That is where we need to do the work. And I really hope that in the coming months, as we do our debates, that we will get to be able to discuss lots of these social issues. Senator Springer, of course, will lead us through with his social skills and so on. But I think that really and truly, we need to recognize that there are a lot of psychological and sociological issues. And you know, in the United States, for example, virtually every person has, as they say, their own shrink. And while we still have, or we'll still see in Barbados, dealing with a psychologist or a psychiatrist as a taboo issue, I think we need to recognize that if we are going to get our young people to be able to deal with conflict and to deal with the other very many issues that they have to deal with in their life, that we're going to have more psychologists and more psychiatrists to be able to help them through these emotional periods. Finally, I just wanted to make two comments on the bills itself. One is that I still, while the bill now gives the judges more leeway or flexibility in terms of pronouncing a sentence, I still think it is a really huge burden on the judge when he has to pronounce that sentence. And I'm wondering if perhaps part of our overall rethinking of our laws and so on, where perhaps we couldn't be going the way of the US, where you actually have the initial trial, and then you have another phase where a jury is also involved in deciding on that sentence, so that burden is not on the judges alone. I also want to commend the fact that in the bill, and this is something that had been recommended by the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, that it is now mandatory that the accused have a psychological evaluation in order to determine whether or not they're competent to plead. I think that is a very important move, and it is now compulsory. This law makes it compulsory, and I think that we are moving in the right direction. We have somewhere still to go, and as I said, I look forward to having that other discussion, Mr. President, on the wider issue pertaining to the overall death penalty. And with those few comments, I am obliged to you, sir.
President, so I rise to wrap up debate on this offense against a person's bill. I want to first of all thank all honourable senators on both sides for their valuable contributions. I believe Mr. President, as I rise to wrap up debate, I want to thank all of the honourable senators who spoke in this debate for their contributions, their valuable contributions. It was indeed a full and frank debate. We've had some very interesting perspectives in terms of the matters before us today, especially from the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. And suffice it to say, I believe we've covered all of the areas that we were supposed to cover today. I have commend members for indicating their support for the bill, and I look forward to having this matter these matters resolved as quickly as possible. I believe it was mentioned by a number of senators in terms of the number of cases that remain outstanding to be resolved. And as I mentioned earlier, in terms of those for murder and manslaughter, certainly since June to June, we were hamstrung by the ruling of the CCJ, and this would certainly allow us to move forward in terms of those cases, particularly. I should mention, and I believe the Senator Drake's mentioned it, in terms of bringing on the proposal to bring on additional temporary judges to try to fast track the process in terms of criminal cases, and also in terms, we speak of criminal cases of over 1,000 outstanding to be dealt with. And so we're looking to push this process forward. Members would also be aware that on the order paper stands an item to be debated in here, the Law Revision and Reform Bill, which I'm sure a number of honourable members and potential draftsmen will have, legal draftsmen that is, would have the opportunity to really show us their merits or demerits. Mr. President, with these few words, I am now going to beg that get the correct title, that the Offences Against a Person Amendment Bill 2018 be now read a second time.
The bill, Offences Against the Person Amendment Bill 2018 be now read a second time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour, you have his choice. Okay.
Also, just like for the clerk or the deputy, the clerk himself, as your way is obeyed. His presence is needed before we go into committee.
You leaving?
Why don't you raise it to the-
Fighting. It was fighting. I saw what.
I don't know how you're basing confirmation on weak point. That don't mean that it's supposed to be. That's actually.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
Question is that the bill under consideration be now committed to the committee of the whole Senate. All those in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. I now give to the chairman of committees. I think I should stand there by all.
I do not.
Your prophet sign off on his support.
House is now in committee, the Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. All honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that clause 2 stand part. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes.
Mr. Deputy President, with your leave, sir. I know this would have been discussed differently, but I just wanted to raise it for the record and hear what the other senators have to say. With respect to clause 2, the proposed bill says at clause 2 that at subclause 1, a person who commits the offense of murder may be liable on conviction on indictment to A, suffer death, or B, imprisonment for life, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have a slight challenge, though, and I thank Senator Franklin for bringing it to my attention. Subclause 6, sir, goes on to say, where the court in sentencing a person convicted of murder does not impose the sentence of imprisonment for life, the court shall impose a term of imprisonment having regard to the guidelines set out in sections 39 and 49 of the Penal System Reform Act, Chapter 139. I'm wondering, Mr. Deputy President, whether by virtue of the fact that
You don't know we ask you all this.
that, oh, yeah.
Is in the new bill.
I'm sorry, Mr. Deputy President, I'm getting assistance from Senator Boyce. My question is, we have in clause 2, subclause 1, that a person who commits the offense of murder may be liable for either a death penalty or a life imprisonment. But then subclause 6 makes provision for you being convicted of murder, but the life imprisonment is not being imposed. You're going to get a term of imprisonment. I'm wondering in that case whether clause 2, subclause 1 should have added to it clause C to make provision for when you're convicted of murder, but you have not had a life imprisonment term imposed on you, but you're going to have a term of imprisonment. I probably have confused every non-lawyer here right now. I'm sorry. Let me do that again. Y'all following? So I understand the fact that the Interpretation Act has a definition and has a limit, a period on imprisonment for life. But I just am raising that as what I see as something that is not clear in the legislation, which by extension has the potential to become an issue of interpretation in the law courts down the road. I could be wrong, but I'm guided by not even Senator Walker, because I know what his position is going to be. I wanted to go on the record and raise it because it seems to me that you're given subclause 2 gives 2 options: death and life imprisonment. Subclause 6 is giving yet another option, which is you're guilty of murder, you're not getting life, you're getting a term of imprisonment. So is it not that murder has 3 options: death, life, and a term of imprisonment because you committed murder, but for whatever reason, because of what is outlined in the Penal System Reform Act in sections 39 and 41, you have committed murder, but you fall into a different category. So should we leave it as a subclause 6, or does it become part of subclause 2 for purposes of clarity and efficiency? And I will now sit for full effectiveness. Okay, good.
Mr. Deputy President, at the lunch break, the Honourable Senator and myself and Senator Franklin discussed this matter with the Attorney General, by phone, of course. We spent about half an hour discussing it. There was no clear position on it. And in those circumstances, I'm prepared. I am not a legal luminary. I never pretended to be. I have no intentions of becoming a legal draftsperson either. And in these circumstances, I propose that it be said, and I said, and I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
Mr. Chairman, the discussion that we had with the Attorney General left everything to me as clear as mud. And I am still of the view that, because he was saying to us that life imprisonment, if you check the Interpretation Act, means that the judge could impose a penalty lesser than life. So if that is the case, well, you have 6. Because sub B, you got sub 2, 1, A, and then B. If B means you can have life imprisonment, and his interpretation means that life imprisonment means you can have anything less than life. The judge can impose anything less than life. Now, if that is the case, then why is it necessary to have 6? Because 6 is imposing something lesser than life, so that means you said it twice. So that's why I'm confused. That's why I said it left me even, as I said.
Is it the case that making assurance that
Out of abundance of caution?
yeah, that you take every single possible sentence into consideration? You can give life, and you can give anything under that. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 1 year, 3 years, 35 years. You have it up to you to do it. The judge has a very wide discretion.
I understand that.
So that is why I'm saying, well, if he has life or anything that he can get as B, then there's no need for
Yeah, but if,
6, because 6 is saying you can give him less than life. But you already said it already. I'm no legal luminary, I just understand English language. And the English there is a redundancy.
Mr. Deputy President, first of all, the Honourable Senator is correct. We discussed it with the Attorney General. He spoke about using the Interpretation Act. We maintain that when you're speaking about sections 39 and 41, it has to be dealt with in terms in conjunction with the Penal System Reform Act, which is before us also today, Mr. Deputy President. So I don't know what is the quandary, what is the confusion. I don't understand. Perhaps I don't understand English very well, perhaps.
Mr. Deputy President,
But I do believe that we address.
yes, but the quandary that we face and the reality that we face, Mr. Deputy President, is that for matters of this nature, particularly when the Senate goes into committee, we should have the benefit of someone from CPC to assist with these issues. Because in all fairness to the leader of government business, he is not an attorney. The attorneys that are present here have general knowledge of drafting. None of us, as far as I know, have specialist skill in legislative drafting. But to my mind, I would rather be a part of something that is sure than unsure. When we pass legislation that has lacunas, sir, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if Senator Franklin raised it, somebody's going to raise it down the road and confuse the courts on issues of interpretation. It seems to me that we have a definition, we have an explanation for the offense of murder that allows for death and imprisonment for life. We also have somebody who is convicted of murder but has not had a life sentence imposed on them, and they are being looked at pursuant to the Penal System Reform Act. Which suggests to me that there's another type of murder for which penalties apply, and for drafting purposes, it would seem to me that subclause 6 should have fallen under subclause 2. The reality is that for purposes of voting this into existence, we all know based on the numbers what is likely to happen, but that does not mean that if I see something that does not make sense to me, Mr. Deputy President, that I'm not going to raise it for the attention of all those who are present, and hopefully that if there is merit in what I have to say as it relates to a person qualified in legal drafting, that it would not be addressed down the road. But on that point, I would also like to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we need to move away from we'll fix it next time, because just now to do anything in Barbados, you're going to have 50 pieces of legislation to work out what the law is, because we keep amending the previous amendment. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, to offer a ray of hope. Section 2.1 says a person who commits the offense of murder may be liable on conviction on indictment to suffer death, or imprisonment for life. At 6 it says where the court in sentencing a person convicted of murder does not impose the sentence of imprisonment for life. So what you're faced with...
Why don't you read from 4, not just read 6. Read above it 4 and come down.
A minimum term of imprisonment shall be served before becoming eligible for a release order. I'm with you there. In determining the appropriate minimum term of imprisonment pursuant to 4, have regard to be, and I'm with you there totally. The question is, sir, the reference of imprisonment for life, do we need to add anything to that term to allow it to fit within 4, 5, and 6? Because, right, 5 and 6, yeah. So it's 5 and 6, sir. So in other words, it's not the difficulty which Senator Tate is trying to draw the attention of the the deputy presidency to, sir, is that essentially you're asking to pass a bill right now that says there are two possible sentences, and then later on suggest there is another one. Now, we understand that within imprisonment for life, the duration could be a term of years. I understand that as a lawyer. I am saying that, is that clear from what we see here? We see it quite clearly stated that you're either to suffer death or imprisonment for life. That's two categories. And then subsection 6 says, if you do not impose the sentence of imprisonment for life. So can we insert a term or some type of reference so that they understand that that is a reference to a period of time, and that way there is no issue, there is no substantive change to the bill, and we move forward?
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
The question is that clause 2 stand part. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no.
No.
Methinks the ayes have it. Next one.
3.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 stand part. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor, the President, the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor, the President, the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman has reported to me the passage of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
Question is that this bill be now read a third time. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those in favor, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Offences Against the Person Amendment Act 2018.
Question is that this bill be now passed and be so cited. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. I think the ayes have it.
Order number 2, in the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Criminal Procedure Amendment Bill 2018.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the Criminal Procedure Amendment Bill 2018 be now read a second time.
The question is that
Criminal Procedure Amendment.
yes, that the cognate bill, the Criminal Procedure Amendment Bill 2018, be now read a second time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I leave the chair and the matter committee of the whole Senate. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. I think the ayes have it. I just get out now.
Not yet. Not yet. You have a long time.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
The question is that clause 2 stand par.
Mr. Deputy President, clause 2, it amends 6, it says that the Criminal Procedure Act, Cap 127, and this act referred to the Criminal Act is amended by inserting immediately after section 6A, and it says psychiatric evaluation. It says the High Court shall order a person who is to be arraigned upon indictment for the offense of murder to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. How would this work? Because I thought that it goes before a magistrate first. You know? Huh? It goes before a magistrate. I think that this should happen at that point where the magistrate send you, because then you're going to waste the court's time. So this I think this is Thank you. No, you can speak in committee. Because I'm saying that this is.
He wants to know how this will be done.
It happens before I get to the judge.
That goes on, even now.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that clause 2 stand par.
The question is that clause 2 stand par. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that clause 3 stand.
The question is that clause 3 stand par. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passage of the bill under consideration in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the bill under consideration be now read a third time. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Criminal Procedure Amendment Act 2018.
The question is that the bill under consideration be now passed and be so cited. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Order number 3. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Constitution Amendment Number 2 Bill 2018.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the Constitution Amendment Number 2 Bill 2018 be now read a second time.
Question is that the bill, Constitution Amendment Bill, be now read a second time. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and that the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
Question is that I do now leave the chair. And that the Senate resolve itself into committee in full session. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1,
Mr. President, I beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2,
Deputy President, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
The question is that clause 2 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3,
I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4,
Deputy President, I beg to move that clause 4 stand part.
Deputy President, sir, I have a proposed amendment for Clause 4 in accordance with Standing Order 50, Proceduring Committee of the Senate on a bill.
Clause 4.
Thank you.
Proposed amendment, Mr. Deputy President, to the wording set out in Clause 4 under the prerogative of mercy, Section 78, my proposed wording, which is here to be handed to the clerk. Very briefly, sir, I had Standing Order 50, procedure in Committee of the Whole of Senate on a bill. Mr. Deputy President, sir, under the prerogative of mercy, the existing draft that is before the committee, section 78, Mr. Deputy President, subsection 3, currently reads, where a person makes a submission in accordance with subsection 5. Subsection 5 requires a person to submit directly or through a legal or other representative written representation in relation to the exercise by the Governor General or the Privy Council or any of their respective functions under this section. Mr. Deputy President, the Constitution as it currently stands provides at section 78, subsection 3, that where any person has been sentenced to death for an offense, the Governor General shall cause a written report of the case. This then triggers the powers of the Privy Council. Mr. Deputy President, sir, I am submitting that we propose an amendment to the first line to bring it back in line with the original Constitution so as to afford protection for persons who, for whatever reason, may not trigger the protection of the Privy Council either due to poor advice or to some other form of ill fortune or incapacity. Mr. Deputy President, the proposed substitution is very simple, is in line with the procedure of the standing order, and simply means, Mr. Deputy President, that subsection 3, which you have before you, instead of where a person makes a submission in accordance with subsection 5, will be replaced with where any person has been sentenced to death. And this is in line with the existing Constitution, sir.
I beg to second that, sir.
I also support the proposed amendment by Senator Boyce. Sir.
it doesn't really have to have notice, long-term notice.
This is in they said that the person refine the exercise of the prerogative of mercy by the government general. That's the purpose. And they said, and they explained. Mr. Deputy President, I had the opportunity to discuss this matter with Senator Boyce over the last hour or so. He knows I spoke to the Attorney General. He knows also that I have perused the file dealing with this matter dating back to 2009. He knows that there was a committee established then which met for 4 years to discuss this matter. He knows that in terms of the amendments to the Constitution, the committee said that they were refining the FMA Court, refining the exercise of the prerogative of mercy by the Governor General, that they were doing the replacing Section 7 to remove the Governor General's capacity to direct that there should be time limits within which the person may appeal to or consult any person or body of persons other than Her Majesty, etc. It's all clear in the notes as to why they decided to make this amendment. And I explained this to the Honourable Senator, Mr. Deputy President.
Mr. Deputy President, I find it particularly interesting that for something like this, the leader of government business is going to look back into the past, whereas from day one, the government senators were moving forward because everything in the past did not make any sense and was no good. So why are we deciding today that we're going to look back into the past about something that is fairly straightforward? Senator Boyce has been clear, and this government has made it clear that they don't want to be associated with anything from the past, Mr. Deputy President.
Mr. President, Deputy President, if I may speak for myself, I'm not about to make any political speech, but I've never said that I'm not interested in dealing with anything from the past. Be that as it may. Be that as it may, there must have been a reason, and that is all I was seeking to do. I'm not a legal draftsman, to find out why the decision was made to do the amendment. I've said earlier, I spoke to the Senator Boyce also, he's aware that all that is happening here is trying to do all of these amendments and everything in effect were made and agreed to prior to May 2018. It's all here. And all they're trying to do is to, in the light of the case, to fast track the process. It is here why they decided. As me looking back, that is how I have to know what is happening in terms, that's why I asked for the file, to see what was the background, what was the reason, what was the thinking. Mr. Deputy President.
Mr. Deputy President, sir, before we move, I think I understand the frustration of the leader of government business, but we are dealing with human lives here. And if they got it wrong, they got it wrong. And we are not in this Senate bound by whatever was the recommendations of the committee. The suggestion I am making is one which I feel extremely strongly about, because it is a prerogative which we are taking away a level of protection for human life that currently stands in the Constitution. We are removing that and saying you individuals should make the application for clemency. I don't think we should let that stand. The Constitution says the Governor General, once you're sentenced to death, will take certain steps. I am not proposing to stop the procedure today. I'm not proposing to delay. All I'm saying is to bring it in line with what the Governor General powers currently are. Thank you, Mr. Deputy President.
If it says that the person still has the right through a legal or other representative, that is not automatic. It has a right. He will still have a right.
Yes, Mr. Deputy, that's not the issue. The issue, Mr. Deputy, is if he doesn't do anything.
And they go through the Governor General?
No, Mr. Deputy President, what is currently being done is the obligation is being shifted on the accused to say, give me clemency. Currently, the Constitution says once you're sentenced to death, the Governor General gets involved and activates the Privy Council. The concern that I have, sir, is that we are now putting it in the hands of the individual who, for whatever reason, we cannot contemplate the variety of vagaries on the human mind, will determine not to trigger that clause or to make that representation. There is an existing catch-all that we are removing, and that is the
But
trouble.
we still don't want
This is a
we still don't
constitution.
want a situation where, for one reason or another, I don't know what the reason, for one reason or you took the Governor General out of it. And now you're saying put back the Governor General into it. Because you are going to end up then not knowing where you're going back there, because you haven't seen the reasons either why they moved it away from there.
True, but Mr. Deputy President, there are 11 persons on death row. The quantum of persons being sentenced to death is not exhaustive. This is not an exhaustive burden on the Governor General. This is a protection provided in the Constitution. I am saying that if we are stripping it, let us pause for a moment.
But the right is not taken from the accused person.
It is, Mr. Deputy President, for raising my voice. It is
still has the right.
The right is, it is removed as an automatic protection. There is currently in this sacred text an automatic protection for anyone sentenced to death. We are now saying remove it, and you person who are sentenced to death, help yourself. And I am saying that persons may not have the wherewithal where they find themselves in that situation to trigger that obligation, Mr. Deputy President.
Speaking on the amendment.
Mr. Deputy Chair, I reluctantly rise to say a few words. I am not a lawyer, but it seems to me that a man or woman who is sentenced to death that has, according to the Constitution, an automatic right given, and we're going to remove it and then say somebody else must now do this or remind you to do it. There is a big change. There is a big change, and it could mean life or death for that person. Yes, it's in section 78. Section 78.3. It's a serious change, Mr. President.
Any person has been sentenced for criminal.
Mr. Deputy President, if
Any person who has been
I
sentenced
were unfortunate enough to be sentenced to death, and the Constitution guaranteed me that the matter automatically got sent to the Governor General and there had to be a review of it, then I would have a level of comfort far greater than if it depended on me or someone else representing me having to trigger the process. And it deserves, Mr. Deputy President, some serious consideration.
I don't think those few words take it any further. Because
Mr. Deputy President,
listen, sentence of death, get the sentence.
I'm hearing quite clearly the views of the leader of government business, and I'm not making any comment with regard to the special committee. I'm just seeing it from the point of view of someone who might just well lose their life when it could have been saved.
Mr. President, Deputy President, I beg to move that clause 4 stand part.
You were going to speak. Lynette wants to speak.
Speak now and move it again.
Yeah, go on.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I was rising ready to seek clarification through you to ask Senator Boyce if he could read the proposed amendment again, if you would allow it. I wish to hear, Mr. Deputy President.
With your leave, Mr. Deputy President, the current form of the Constitution sets out at Section 78 that at Section 3, Senator Holder, at the existing constitution. Section 78, subsection 3. Where any person has been sentenced to death for an offense against the law of Barbados, the Governor General shall cause a written report of the case from the trial judge, together with such other information derived from the record of the case or elsewhere, as the Governor General may require, to be forwarded to the Privy Council, so the Privy Council may advise him on the exercise of the powers conferred on him by Section 1 in relation to that person. So currently, as the Constitution stands, automatically, when a death sentence is imposed, the Privy Council and the Governor General powers are triggered, a report is done. Under the proposed amendment, Senator Holder, you will see there is a there is a clause 78.3 and clause 78.5. 78.5 says that a person has a right to submit directly or through a legal or other representative written representation in relation to the exercise by the Governor General or the Privy Council of any of their respective functions under this section. That is, the individual now makes the application to the Governor General, and then you'll see at the new 78.3, where a person makes a submission in accordance with subsection 5, which I just read, in respect of an offense against the laws of Barbados, the Governor General shall cause a written report of the case from the trial judge together with such other information and trigger the Privy Council. What I am suggesting, Senator Holder, is to remove the requirement, to retain the existing constitution, which provides the protection of the Governor General's office automatically generating the report and triggering the Privy Council, and therefore in the proposed amendment, just change the first line where it says where a person makes a submission in accordance with subsection 5 and simply says where a person has been sentenced to death.
That's what they did. So let me vote against it. Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that clause 4 stand parked.
The question is that clause 4 stand parked. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no.
No. Divide.
A divide is called.
Oh, yes. I want to vote against it. Is it 2/3 majority? There is a amendment to the Constitution. So it needs 2/3. I say no here, go then. Be 14. You will sit down here in committee. We ain't get there yet. We ain't get there yet. No, you go.
Senator Walcott,
Aye.
Senator Moore, Senator Ms. McCartney.
Springer.
Senator Springer, Dr. Springer. Senator Holder. Senator Holder. Oh, sorry. No, that's not. What is it? What was missing? Senator Dr. Haynes. Senator Sands. Senator Adams. Senator Nurse. Senator Dr. Maynard.
No.
Senator Ms. State.
No.
Senator Reverend Maxwell.
No.
Senator Boyce.
Nay.
No. Senator Ms. Wiggins. No. Senator Branch. Sorry, Ms. Drakes.
No.
Senator Franklin.
No.
Deputy President, 9 honorable senators voted aye and 8 honorable senators voted no. Declare.
Carry it then.
Declare the ayes have it. Declare. You see, clause 4 has been passed. Clause 4 has been passed.
Yeah, it has been, the vote, yes, the vote has been passed. Does it mean it?
Yeah.
You will determine You will determine that.
You go move from here now.
Report,
Yeah, you go.
report the passing.
Vote it passing.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that you do not report His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Move is stealth, man. Chairman has reported to me the passage of the bill under consideration in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
It's been moved that the bill under consideration be now read a third time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I think those against?
No. Call for divide. Yes, divide, that's it.
Division has been called for.
Senator Mr. Walcott. Senator Ms. Moore. Senator Ms. McConney.
Aye.
Senator Dr. Springer. Senator Ms. Holder. Senator Dr. Haynes. Senator Sands. Senator Adams. His Honor Deputy President. Senator Nurse. Senator Dr. Maynard. Senator Ms. State.
No.
Senator Reverend Maxwell.
No.
Senator Boyce.
No.
Senator Ms. Wiggins. Senator Ms. Drakes.
No.
And Senator Franklin.
No.
But no, when it goes to be cited, they have to vote the final form. I don't mind. I want to go that day, vote it is. But they just go for it. Maybe when it comes to be cited, they vote 2 days of the cited.
Mr. President, 9 honorable members voted aye, and 8 honorable senators voted no. Yeah, when you
You would do that then. Ring the bell. This is the time. That's only the third time. And then we vote for 2/3. Then we decide if it's going to be passed or not. I go in there. I go in there.
Given the results of the division, as was called for, 9 in favor and 8 against, I now declare the bill to be read and served. Is the motion?
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the as the Constitution Amendment number 2, Act 2018. This is when you vote for 2/3 or not.
The question is that the bill.
No. We have to vote 2/3. It's a constitutional amendment. The bill is right there. We vote. We need.
The question again.
That the bill be passed, on consideration be passed, and be so cited.
Senator Walcott?
Aye.
Senator Ms. Moore? Senator Ms. McConney? Senator Dr. Springer?
Aye.
Senator Ms. Holder? Senator Dr. Haynes? Senator Sands? Senator Adams? His Honor, the Deputy President? Senator Nurse? Senator Dr. Maynard?
No.
Senator Ms. State?
No.
Senator Reverend Maxwell?
No.
Senator Boyce?
No.
Senator Ms. Wiggins? Senator Ms. Strakes?
No.
Senator Franklin?
No.
Mr. President, 9 honorable senators voted aye and 8 honorable senators voted no. said it was not, that bill has not met.
They had not met the two-thirds majority. And then we proceed.
Receive the two-thirds.
And these are the two of varying constitution. So you have to decide whether to do the resolution. I don't feel it's just you might need to consider things again. Then they want to do the
NIS.
all the way along.
Resulting from the vote just taken, I'm advised that this bill, constitutional amendment bill, has not met the requirements of two-thirds. And to that extent, it has not passed.
It did. It's not passed, it doesn't run anyway. It did.
Order number 4.
It's ready to revive, but right now she did.
Move the second reading of the Penal System Reform Amendment Bill 2018.
Mr. President, I beg to move the Penal System Reform Amendment Bill 2018 be now read a second time.
It's been moved that the bill under consideration be now read a second time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Against, please say no.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of the bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair. And the Senate resolve itself into a committee for the further consideration of this bill. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
So, Deputy President, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
So, Deputy President, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
So, Deputy President, I beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Mr. Pino?
Mr. President,
Sure.
Deputy President. Clause 3. So, Deputy President, I beg to move that the UNO report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passes of the bill presently under consideration in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the bill under consideration be now read a third time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Penal System Reform Amendment Act 2018.
We move that the bill under consideration be now read third, be now passed and be so cited. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Order number 5, in the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Prisons Amendment Bill 2018.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the Prisons Amendment Bill 2018 be now read a second time.
It is being moved that the bill presently under consideration be now read a second time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
It is being moved that I do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee of the whole Senate for the further consideration of this matter. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Deputy President, I dare to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman has reported to me the passes of the bill presently under consideration in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
Question is that the bill under consideration be now read a third time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have
Mr.
it.
President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Prisons Amendment Act 2018.
Question is that the bill under consideration be passed and be so cited. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Present order number 9 on the supplementary order paper. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to seek the concurrence to the Honourable Senate in the amendments made by the Honourable the House Assembly to the National Insurance and Social Security Amendment and Validation Bill 2018.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe this matter was partially addressed this morning when Your Honor read a message from the Honourable the House of Assembly. The matter occurred in matter of the National Insurance and Social Amendment Validation Bill 2018, which was debated in this Honourable Chamber 2 weeks ago. Members will recall that at the time of discussion and debate, amendments were made based on advice received in this Honourable Chamber. I believe the advice was given in good faith, but incorrect. In fact, I believe all honourable members were copy of the message was distributed to all honorary members, and it spoke, in fact, to the fact, it said that the training levy of 0.5% payable under the Occupational Training Act, Cap 42, and the catastrophe fund levy of 0.1% payable under the Catastrophe Fund Act 39D must not be included in the National Insurance Self-Employed Regulations, as it would inaccurately inflate the amount that should be paid by persons under those regulations. I believe the issue was that the bill had suggested that it be moved from 15.5 to 16.5, but the amendment said it should in fact be 17.1, because this additional 0.5 and 0.1%, which should not have been included, were included. So the Honourable House has amended the bill as sent to that chamber by this chamber by leaving out the words substituted and reinstated the words appearing in the original bill for the aforementioned reason. Mr. President, I believe there should be no difficulty in doing this and convincing honourable senators to agree to this amendment. I beg to move that this resolution be now passed.
The question is that the resolution under consideration be now passed.
Stand up, Mr. President.
Mr. President, you would recall the circumstances of this thing. You know, we've been arguing and we've been complaining all the time and saying that we don't have any technocrats here with us when we are going through these things. This now, and let me say it's my fault, because when I go to pay national insurance, I have to pay 16.1%. So when I see this thing, I say, well, something's wrong here, right? Now, so that was the genesis of the advice that came, because the figures that I paid as opposed to what was apparently the bill, there was a problem. That is what I'm saying. I'm not complaining about the bill. I'm going to support it. I mean, resolution, I'm going to support it. What I'm saying to you is it demonstrates the need for having someone. The civil servants prepare them. Because you're sending home a lot of them down me that some of them went left.
Please address the chair, please.
Sorry, sir.
Once you do that, you.
So that is what I'm saying is, and it's simple. We need to have someone here from the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office or somebody when we have issues like this who can guide us, right? Because this is clear, and I'm only begging, I'm asking, please make the suggestions somewhere so that we can have a technocrat available to us.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution be now approved.
The question is that the resolution under consideration be now passed.
Simply.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, this brings us to the end of our business for today's sitting, and I beg to move that this honourable chamber be now adjourned until the 21st of November at 11 a.m.
At 11 a.m. At 11 a.m.
I don't recognize
I'm speaking on
the adjournment.
on the adjournment. Okay.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. Mr. President, before we adjourn for the afternoon, I just wanted to crave the indulgence of the Honourable Senate, the House, to draw to its attention that on the 27th of October 2018, I had the distinct pleasure of being a guest of the Blue Green Initiative, Inc. It's an NGO, and they hosted their premiere of their Caribbean eco-films, The Fisheries, One Storm Away, and Island Strong. And the focus was climate change, here and now. The reason I'm mentioning it in the Honourable House is twofold. One of the directors and one of the key persons behind this amazing experience for us at the Arabara Center is Dr. Crystal Drakes, and I really, really wish her to be recognized. Those films were fantastic. They were eye-openers. I do hope, Mr. President, that somehow the Blue-Green Initiative is able to extend an invitation to both houses to view these films. The topic was very current. It was they were moving, they were informative, they were very, very well done by herself and her colleagues. Dr. Drakes was in her finest on the 27th, including ladies' heels. It was amazing for me. But on a serious note, the topic of climate change, where a lot of the filming was done not only with our own people, our fishermen and so on, but they went into Dominica. And it blew my mind, the viewing and the pictures and the filming that was shared with us. And they kept saying that they didn't even share all of it. So I wanted to formally and officially and publicly commend Dr. Crystal Drakes and her team, the Blue-Green Initiative, for the presentation of their 3 films, The Fisheries, One Storm Away, and Island Strong, that was held on the 27th of October 2018 at the Arabara Center. Thank you very much for your indulgence, Mr. President.
Thank you very much for putting this in. I think I can join you in commending on behalf of all of us, Dr. Drakes and Drakes. And from what you said, it's a must-see show.
It is certainly 3 films, sir, we must.
All of us who are available will be there.
All right, yeah.
Thank you very much. And that was just a useful distraction from the question that the Senate be now adjourned until the 21st. Is that the date? 11 o'clock, 21st?
7 a.m.
Say aye. Those against, please say no. And after a good day's work, be done with that.
All rise.
You have to make fun of it, you're going to say levity. Yes.